Welcome. Our speaker tonight is a distinguished scholar and a very articulate advocate for the things she loves. Mindell Dubansky, and I'm going to read some of this, is museum librarian for preservation and head of the Sherman Fairchild Center for Book Conservation at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Her most recent publication is a 2021 book, Pattern and Flow, A Golden Age of American Decorated Paper, 1960s to 2000s. She's a neighbor of ours in Tivoli. What you don't necessarily know from that is that also Mindy is an extraordinary collector of Blooks. Blooks being objects that look like books but aren't books, and has herself in her possession or under her control what may be the largest collection of Blooks in the country, which is looking for a home perhaps in a museum. And so more about that, and then when she finds the right museum, she'll come back and talk about Blooks.
I'm not going to wait that long.
All right, okay. Anyway, welcome.
Thank you.
Mindy.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay.
Thank you. It's really nice. It's really nice to be here. The last time I gave a talk on the subject was the summertime. So here we are, and it was in Joan Davidson's house, one of her talks. So that was, she's passed away recently, which was really sad. I'm sure a lot of you knew her. So this is I guess I'll just start. So I'll keep my slides going so you're not bored listening, and you can look at pictures. So what I brought to show you, if you're into it, is this talk is about a collection that I built for the museum beginning in 2016, and it was just I called it the Paper Legacy Project. I didn't even remember pressing a button. It just happened. Because of, I've been at the Met for 41 years. It's a really long time. And I was concerned that, I was getting to the later side of my career, and I've done so many projects, and they always take years and years. And I thought, well, I probably got one more in me. And what's it going to be? It better be a good one. And I really wanted to do something for my field, the book arts field, the bookbinding field, and for the museum, for the library, something really special, to build a really unique collection. And I thought about what that would be, and I thought about all the different aspects of the book arts, printing, paper making, all these things. And I thought, if I didn't do something about it, their work would disappear. Like, who is the most pressing and important group? And I decided that it was the decorated paper artists. And the reason why is because they did not have a professional organization. Their work was signed on the back, and it was meant to be cut up sold in commercial stores and cut up in little pieces. So very quickly after it was sold or even made, the attribution would be lost. And also, if it was glued down to something, it was signed on the back. So for so many reasons, I just thought, it'll go, and no one will have any idea in the future who made these beautiful papers, how they made them, why they made them, what they made them for. And I asked my boss, I said, I want to build this collection called the Paper Legacy Collection, and I want to contact the most active commercial makers of these papers, because I thought their papers are everywhere. They're on everybody's books, the small press books, and I want to document their work. I want to create a representative collection of their work, which is a subjective term, and also to collect their biographical information and information about their businesses. And this is basically what I was looking for, was what would a scholar need in the future to really be able to correctly interpret who they were and what they did and why they did it. Then I wanted to create a digital database of the papers and have related documentation about their businesses in addition. So I did, and the last mission was to really educate the public about the decorated paper. It really wasn't a movement, it was more of a phenomenon. That's what the artists will tell you, because they didn't do it intentionally. It just was happening all at the same time as a result of this flowering of the crafts in the late 60s and 70s. And just sort of this revival of the book arts and many other crafts that all of us, I don't have to tell you about, you lived it, right, a lot of you. So, and then I wanted to go a little further and educate, how are we going to educate the public? You know, what are the, and this is, we're doing that tonight, right? So that worked out. So it was 6 years from the first collection that I made to when I finished the collection, which wound up being 53 artists. I just want you to know I'm blind up here because that light's like, right, I can't really see you, but so what is as a result of all this collecting and labeling and nudging of these artists and going back and collecting more, we wound up with a book which I brought tonight, Pattern and Flow, and also this is the very first book, the Watson Library, and that's the library I work for, the main research library of the Met. The very first book the library ever published in 150 years, and is likely the only one they may ever publish. But I was trying to set a precedent for my peers. In addition, this project was really a win-win situation for everyone, the artists, for the library, for myself, and then I had some exhibitions, and I had this big exhibition at the Grolier Club where I got to show, like, it's a nice big gallery if you've ever been there. So that was really nice to have that. So at the end, I got help from our ISNT librarians, and we created this paper legacy resource guide. So if you went to the Watson Library website and you would see our resource guides, we have a resource guide to the collection that makes it easier for people like you to access it, because it's a lot of stuff, and if you're not used to using our website. And what the resource guide has, it has a link to our digital. We digitized all the papers, so you can see the papers. You can see biographical information about the artists, lots of things. And one of the most wonderful things that we were able to do, Ink and Gall magazine was the only marbling magazine that existed. It was such a great, it really helped me a lot. And it didn't last for a long time because there was a fire in the home and studio of the people who were editing it, and it was a couple who edited and published it. And they're beautiful magazines with tipped-in original papers, and we did get a full set from someone that was in perfect condition, and we got permission to digitize it, and that's a gold mine. So how did I contextualize a subject that there was really nothing published about? I kind of had to go, which I like to do. I love to do primary research, from the horse's mouth. It's my favorite thing. And I realized that, the paper art, how I collected these artists, because I knew these artists. I bought their work. I'm a bookbinder. So, I knew a lot of them. And the ones that I didn't know, which were mostly people out in the West Coast and the Southwest, the artists that I knew them, so it grew that's how I found it. And I went through Ink and Gall, and I noted every artist that was an article published about them or by them. That's just for the marblers, because we have different techniques represented here. But it was a good start. So when I decided that I was going to have the book and I was going to have the show, I thought, oh my God, I never thought that would also be my job, to have to contextualize the subject for everyone in perpetuity. So from Ink and Gall, and also the artists, I knew that in 1989 there was the first International Marblers Gathering in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and this was the first get-together where these people came together, and they had days of discussions and presentations. They made stuff together. They had a sale room. They just did. It was really an intensive. And all those people who organized it were still in Santa Fe. And so I called a meeting of them. One of them still had a job, and he was working in the library at the New Mexico History Museum. And we just sat in the library all day, and I just, they told their stories. I interviewed them. I asked all the questions that I had. All the artists had written, I had asked all my questions too to all the artists, because I sent all the artists a survey form and with all my questions, like what I want to know as someone who's interested in the subject. So from that group, and right from their opinion, I formed like a kernel of like how did it get started and why and what did they think of it, and this is the beautiful place we went to. They have a print shop there. A couple of the Paper Legacy artists ran this print shop for their entire careers, Pam Smith and Tom Leach, and it was just strikingly beautiful. And when Tom had papers that he didn't like, which are like the ones on your right, he just made these blank books out of them and sold them in the bookshop. He's an amazing marbler, and he also makes handmade paper, and he marbles, one of the few artists who marbles on handmade paper. And here's the group, and I don't need to tell you who they are because it's not really your field. It doesn't really, all the names of everyone, but I'm happy to if you want to know later. But basically, a bunch of old hippies, and a couple guests and a couple partners, were there, and it was just so. After all this time of talking to them, I finally got to meet them. I was very excited, and one of them's son became a photographer, Polly, who was the editor of Hand Paper Making, and he took these pictures of all of us. And here's, so as I said, Polly Fox and Dexter Ink started Ink and Gall magazine, marbling journal, and they also had a press called the Fresh Ink Press, and they published books, and they republished historic treatises on marbling, so that these young artists coming into the field would have the historic information.
Can you tell me what marbling is? I have never heard
Oh,
of that
I
word.
should have done it first, but okay. Well, marbled paper. Maybe I had another version of this where I did that in the beginning for people who don't know. This is marbling, and I have a lot of papers here. So marbling is done. Have you seen old books with beautiful end papers? Yeah. Like this on the cover and on the inside? This is an old paper from a book. How this is done is on a water bath. There's a tray of water, and the water is thickened with traditionally carrageen moss. So it's like makes it a little thicker. So when they made watercolor paints, and then they would take like little whisks or brushes, and different ways they would splatter the paint on the surface of the water, and that's why it had to be thick, because it wouldn't move around wildly. They could control it. That's how they would get very neat patterns. So the color is on the water, and they would manipulate the patterns on the water with little styluses or tools, combs. There would be a comb. This is a curl made, when you come up, you'll see a curl made with a comb, which they would sort of like go like that on the water. So they would draw on the water. Then the paper itself is treated with alum water, and alum is a mordant. So if like you're dyeing anything, you use a mordant. If you're dyeing fabric, you need a mordant, because otherwise the color doesn't stick to the cotton or the paper. So they would use alum. So they would sponge an alum water with soluble alum on the paper and let it sit under weight for a while. And then when you marble, you lay the paper on top of the bath, on top of the paint, and it transfers onto the paper. So it's like a transfer, like each sheet is sort of like a monoprint. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's marbling. Whereas paste paper, which I also have here, is a direct drawing method or direct painting method. They're painting directly on the paper. But marbling is transferred from a water bath, painting on water. And it's been happening since the Chinese invented it, probably in like the 10th century. I'm just throwing that out there. I mean, it goes way back, to China and India. And it came to Europe like probably when paper did, I don't know, when somebody saw it when they were traveling, and they started using it on books, on the covers of books, on the end papers of books, on edges of books, and other things, boxes, box linings, interior furniture, drawers, and cabinets, like they would use wallpaper too. You've probably seen that more like, so what happened was in America, and I wasn't going to talk too much about the history, but it's in my book. And I got and as someone who's a real historian of marbling, to write the essay on early American marbling up to this point, because that wasn't my field. That's not my expertise. But he did did a beautiful job. And marbling, there was 19th century marblers, probably people who came also from England or France and they marbled, but not that much. And there were huge gaps in time where there was no American decorated paper being made. All of it was imported, or unless it was really rustic. And so what these artists did, the artists that I collected, they really revived something and made it very unique to an American version of it. Something, they weren't just continuing. They had to go back to the original books and they all worked independently through experimentation. There were no teachers at that time teaching this. So it's a really unusual group of people that just were so determined to learn this. And the few of them, this group, decided they wanted to make their living doing it. And so they got good enough. They practiced and practiced and learned until they could make a consistent papers that they could sell, because some of them made one paper like one of a kind, but that's not what that would be more something artists would do. But these were artists, but they were trying to be production artists. They were trying to make consistent sheets that publishers could buy 50 sheets from them and use it for an edition of books, and it would be reasonably similar, even though every sheet was made by hand. Is this helpful?
Mm-hmm. So how did they replicate the pattern?
They just did it over and over. They had recipe books, so they knew they could recreate the same paints. They developed steps. They evolved equipment that helped them do it. And they had to come up with quick drawing systems, like how do you dry 50 sheets of paper if you're in a little studio. Marbling is very touchy. It's very sensitive to temperature, and any kind of dust will leave specks, and air bubbles. So you have to be very skilled at laying the sheet down on the bath so that you don't get air bubbles, which would leave you with a big white spot. Or if you moved in a funny way, it would disturb the pattern. Some of the people who are really good at production made very large tanks, and they marbled like 16 sheets at a time. So they knew all the ink on the bath was the same, and all their motion was the same. And so in a way, every 16
You can only
sheets,
transfer once, though.
you could only transfer once. Although the masters, and I can show you some examples here, over marble. When they got really good, it's like pulling an edition, like a woodcut edition or an etching edition, where they would have a vision for this end product, and they would go back and marble the same sheet up to 5 times. And then what you're seeing, like this sheet here, I don't remember this particular sheet, how much it was marbled, but you can tell that it was marbled, right? Can you see that it may have been marbled numerous times to get this very deep image? Can you see it? She does a lot of over marbling. Pam Smith, really good at it. She uses gouache, so they all use different materials. So should I get back on track, or you feel like I didn't lose you? Are we together? Okay. No, I'm sorry. I should have explained it. Here's the poster from the gathering and the invitation. And it was just this guy, John Coventry, who had like a million hippie names. He dressed up because he sold his papers at the Renaissance Fair, and I mean, he's just such a character. But he really wanted to bring everyone together, and he organized it. It was at St. John's College in they just rented the college. It wasn't a scholarly effort, academic effort. And here he is. He marbled these things he called them fabs, and they were marbled big pieces of fabric, and he made his marbling tank out of the inverted hood of a Volkswagen bus. And he did not put additives in his water because he wanted his paints to really swirl. He even put fans on the paint, so it would just and he was trying to capture it as it was moving. So he was doing the opposite of what the traditional production marblers were doing. But he wasn't a commercial marbler. He wasn't commercial, but he was like the master of sale. He was an entrepreneur, And this is his marbling journal, which is one of the treasures of our collection, the Fab book, where is his manifesto of marbling. which is basically relates to the universe somehow, and it's really great. It's such a wonderful book. And this is Catherine Leffler and her husband Jack Leffler, who's a beat poet, and this is what I was worried about. Quite a few of these people have passed away since I started this project, and Catherine is one of them. I was like so worried, the whole time that that this would happen. But this is one of her papers. So I'm just showing you the artists now and their papers.
Nice.
No, so she had an Etsy shop to the end of her life pretty much, and she got sick in the end, but she had an Etsy shop. So a lot of these people started before the internet, and then they had to make this transition to the internet, and that was difficult for them. So for instance, like if they were used to marbling really a variety of, they weren't interested in repeating their designs over and over again. If you went to a store, you could see the papers and you bought the one you want, right? But when these businesses transferred to the internet, they didn't want to carry the work of artists who did that. They wanted to know if they put a picture on the internet, that's what the person was seeing and that's what they were going to buy. Because if they got it and then they said, that's not what I saw on the internet, they just send everything back. So it was a problem. And it was also like an inhibitor, but there were to the artists because they were creative and they wanted to do different things. And so that was something that happened. And there were always a store or two that really, local stores that really appreciated the individuality of the papers, and they would just buy anything that these artists would produce. And some of the artists came up with their own websites.
But she couldn't do that twice.
Yeah, she could.
It would look a little different.
It wouldn't be photographic. There are printed marble papers. There are companies that would take a design and print it, like a lithograph.
Essentially the same process for textile?
Yeah, if you want to marble on a silk, which you see a lot, the scarves, everybody has seen those marbled scarves, right? They treat them with alum. They have long tanks. And it takes two people because they have to hold it and stretch it because it's so soft. You can't, you have to be coordinated. But sure. Tom Leach, I don't think I have one of his papers here. A beautiful marbler. And this is a technique he was showing me that he developed, which it's called, I forget, he gave it a name like inter something. Well, he actually has his handmade paper, which is very strong. It's like linen rag, right? It's you can't tear it. And he treats it with gesso before he marbles it. And so the paper doesn't adhere the ink doesn't adhere like permanently to the paper right away. There's a time where you can manipulate it before it sets, and that's what he does. And then he goes back and over marbles it, and he builds his design that way using this technique. And these are two of his papers, and they're amazing. And so he uses a squeeze bottle for that one with the red. You can see it's sort of like squeezed. He's not using traditional whisks. And I said, how did you get square dots? I've never seen any marbled paper with square dots. And he said, well, he used a different material. He didn't use carrageen moss. He used methyl cellulose in the water to thicken it, and that somehow made squares as opposed to circles. So I'd never seen anybody else do that. And this is Pam Smith, and Pam's the person who made this paper I showed you, the green one. And she's the one who got the job, who was the first one to work at the print shop at Santa Fe Museum. And she was also a letterpress printer. And she did a lot to encourage the public. She had big fairs every summer. She did a lot of teaching. This, I think, may also be one of hers, a simpler one. And let me tell you, and this is hers too, this beautiful zinnia, and that's her studio. So even when I went there to visit her, she had retired. This is her marbling studio. She marbled 2 days a week. I don't know if she's still doing that. But having this show and writing this book really revived interest in these people, and they were receiving commissions. And so even though they were in their 80s, some of them, they're keeping going. How she got this zinnia pattern, that dotted round flower, she used one of those flower frogs, like the Japanese or the Chinese flower frog. So instead of using a comb, she dipped the frog into the paint and then touched the surface of the bath, and that's how she got that circle. Yeah, it's cool. Here she is, and just took some artistic pictures of her, tried to get some show materials. And I took so many pictures when I visited these people because I knew I had to do the book and I didn't know what I was going to put in it, so I just kept taking pictures. That was my first my first smartphone I ever had. I never had one before. I had to get it to go there to take pictures. And this is Paul and Diane Maurer. And Paul Maurer, he had worked for a commercial print shop. And he became interested in marbling, and he was not interested in being a commercial marbler. He wanted to experiment and be an artist, but he taught Diane, who was married to him at that time, and she became an incredibly prolific decorated paper artist, making all different kinds of decorated paper, including paste paper, which is sort of like the old-fashioned finger painting we did with its designs made and painted with colored paste, which is also a very traditional kind of technique. And she wrote many books. She went on to write a number of books. She was on Martha Stewart. You know, she had been a writer before she did this. So she really advanced the field. She was the person that I would say in my book advised me, the person I called the most when I needed advice on the glossary, terminology, because I thought, well, you know, I got to get the seal of approval because some of these things have a lot of names for different terms, and it was a big responsibility to nail it down, as you can imagine. And here, they all know each other. Here's Paul and Tom. Tom dragged me out. Paul lives in the middle of nowhere and on this farm, and this is one of his papers. And can you see the tiny little dots? He gets that using Tabasco sauce. It like disperses, you know, it creates those dots. So he doesn't even have a computer. So I had to call his wife every time I wanted to talk to him or write her. I mean, some of these people, like I had to write their family in order to get in touch with them. And he still writes letters. He was the biggest corresponder of all the artists. Everybody had letters from him. I did collect correspondence from people if they had it. I asked them, "Did you have anything?" It'd be really great to have correspondence during these early years for how to see how they shared information. But also, all the stationery that they wrote on was marbled, because they always were showing off, you know. They wanted, and they were asking each other, like, I saw a paper you did this thing, how did you do that, and this is my idea, or, you know, like really a lot of it went on in this letter writing, and also with visual examples in the stationery itself. But so I said, Paul, like for each person, I said, you have to answer all my questions, this is my questionnaire, and you have to describe every sheet of paper. And I mean, like, I want to know, what are the materials? What are the techniques? What's the date? Who did you make it for? You know, everything about that sheet of paper. Because if you go to any other paper collection in the world, you see like incredible papers, but not one of them has like anything about it. You're just oohing and ahhing about these beautiful things, but you don't know. And here I had the chance to get. This is an artist collection. They made this collection, not me. You know, I mean, I nudged them, but they selected their papers. They described every sheet of paper. No curator in the future has to interpret what they were doing in that way because they're telling us, and that is so rare. And that was the thing that I thought would be so precious. One of the things that I thought would be so precious about this collection, and it is.
The collection is primarily contemporary work.
It's all the papers. These 3,000 thousands of sheets of papers are in the Watson Library that these people donated and described. But Paul, he didn't have a computer, so he in calligraphy on the back of every sheet, huge, he described how that paper was made, which was really nice to have. Here he is. His studio was like full of, it was so scary. It was terrifying. Here's his art supply cabinet, which is kept it in there. And he had this mini marbling tank that was in an Avery label box, you know. And I just said, Paul, like, just hand it over, you know. And he had made a beautiful leather pouch for it, which is in that picture. And so he made it because he got inspired by another one of the artists who was studying early Indian and Islamic papers, and he was interested in miniature marbling, and so he made himself this little kit to take to workshops, and he marbled all these little sheets of paper. That's one of the marbled sheets, and he gave me a bunch of the little sheets that he marbled. It's really wonderful. All the tools are beautiful. Madeline's a little bit younger. She wasn't involved in that early era, but she's from New Mexico and carrying that tradition on. And I should have brought one of her papers, but boy, she's a paste paper maker. So you can see this isn't marbling. She's painting that sheet of paper. And everyone, I mean, and she sells these papers very inexpensively for books. She also sells them as artworks, but then she makes these sheets for bookbinders specifically, and she makes them the right size to use on maybe a 6x9 book, you know, because they're really, she's a good painter. Everybody loves her work, and I went to, if any of these artists were still working, I went to visit them in their studios and I hung out with them. So especially Madeline, these are her early papers, which she didn't like, and they're completely different because she had some epiphany and she decided to change the way she was working forevermore, and then she discounted all of her early papers, which were exquisite, and these are two of them. And I said, Madeline, you didn't send us any of your early papers, and I really like them, and so she went back and sent us a second collection, and that happened a bunch of times with this, especially if I knew the artists, because I knew what they left out. You know, I knew their work, and I knew what they left out, and I chased them down. Because I thought, I'm not going to get another chance, you know, this is it. Regina and Dan St. John have a company called Chena River Marblers. They're in Amherst, and they're in their 80s, and they're still teaching all year, all around the world. And they're on a mission to spread the word and to train young people. And they are, they do two kinds of work. Dan, who's the black and white, made the black and white marble, goes back to the 18th century treatises, and he makes his own paints, and he does things in the old ways. Whereas Regina, who's got the very colorful sheet, marbles with acrylic. So they have a very different way of working, but they both teach in their same studio. I just took a 2-day workshop with them this summer, and it was really amazing. And any of their students comes out with like the most beautiful things you can't even believe you made yourself, because they are so controlled, all their materials and their way of working, and it's incredible. And here's Peggy Skycraft, who I have a special fondness for, because she's probably the first marble I was really aware of. She sold a lot of, do you remember New York Central Supply in New York City, if any of you were artists? And you know, she sold her papers there. They sold a lot of papers in their paper department. When we had our symposium, I had a symposium during the exhibition. David Aldera, who was the paper buyer for New York Central, gave a presentation, and it was just, oh my God, it was so wonderful to hear from him. New York Central did a lot to help these artists promote their businesses, because they knew everybody. Everybody would come in there and see these papers, and he got them commissions, you know, because they weren't there. They were living in like Nebraska and New Mexico and California. So he really did a lot. So Peggy, this is her paper. I don't know why I love her so much, but I just always do. Her colors were amazing. Her jewel tone colors, her metallics. She made her own paint. She was really interested in paint science and paint chemistry, and she developed a lot of specialized paints, and her papers were very traditional in their patterning. She did a lot of different kinds of things. But I would say generally very traditional in their patterning, but not in her colors. She also marbled a lot on colored paper, which even made them pop more. So she lives in Oregon, in Estacado, Oregon, in the countryside, and she sent me papers that I was like shocked, because they didn't look like her papers to me. They were all brown, and I think of her papers like jewel tone blues and, you know, these beautiful. I was like, wow. I called her up on the phone. I said, I had to talk. You used to think I have confidence. I didn't. I was terrified to call her, but I was so chicken, because one of the other artists, Andrea, came, and Andrea knew Peggy, and I said, Andrea, look at Peggy's papers and tell me what you think. And she said, they don't look like Peggy's papers. And I went, thank you. And then I called Peggy up and I said, Andrea doesn't think the papers that you sent look like your best work, you know. And I said, and this is me, I'm so tactless. I said, I'll never forget that I actually said this to her, that I couldn't think of another way. I said, it looks like you just stuck your hand in the drawer and pulled out whatever came out. And she said, yeah, that's what I did. So then I said, well, do you have an extra room? Because I'm coming. And that was my second travel grant. The second part of my travel grant was to go to Peggy's and pick my own damn papers. Like, I wanted to pick the ones that I loved, you know, of hers. And I spent a week with her going through all of her drawers. And she was one of the very few artists that had archival material about her business. And she gifted us like her recipe books, huge amounts of like very valuable materials. We thought we have to have one archive, you know, where someone can really track the papers back to the business records and really have the correspondence from the people who are ordering the papers and see how it worked, you know. Because no young person could relate to how it worked, because it's like all these orders are like half personal letter, half like, by the way, send me 25. How's this, and how's your garden, and how's this, and by the way, can you send me 25 sheets? But here's a piece of the one you sent me last time. These are the colors I don't like in it, and these are the colors I do like in it. And can you substitute this one? You know, and you know, really individualized custom work. And she and her husband Jack designed so many unique tools, including this hairbrush paint disperser, which made me crazy because it was just so wonderful. Because she had this, I don't know, it was 10 or 12-foot marbling tank, so she couldn't use a little brush to distribute the paint over a 10-foot tank. She had to come up with another way, so she made a paint well out of the hairbrush, and she made a little crank that she stuck in there, and then the paint and the ketchup bottle is the reservoir, and she just like spin the hairbrush, and that's how she got this. So, it was so inventive and wonderful, and it was like my favorite trip of a lifetime. And of course, I was so lucky to be able to go out to Staten Island quite a few times to visit Sage Reynolds and Coleman Rutkin. And Sage Reynolds, so paste paper is really just paste and color. You know, it could be ugly as you can possibly imagine, or it could be so beautiful if people really know what they're doing. And there are several artists who came through grew up in this generation who loved making paste paper and mastered the art of paste paper and also reproducing paste paper. And Sage Reynolds and Coleman have to be like at the top of the heap. They inspired and taught a lot of the other people. I didn't bring his papers because he made his papers on full sheets of arche. Do you know what arche paper? It's a very large sheet of paper. It's a very fine quality paper. But this is Claire Bazarchik's paste paper, and she had a lot of jobs for small press publishers. So you can imagine this on a book, how this would work on a cover of a book, on the end papers of a book. And all of her sheets have a base color. So she started with white paper, and she painted all the papers, just a color. And then she did her design on top of it. And this artist is Dina Schnittman. She also makes paste papers, but her niche was she uses natural dyes. So her papers, also a very talented pattern, graphic artist, but her papers are all very subtle, much more subtle, because they're natural dyes and not strong pigments. And some artists mix it up, like they'll marble and they'll paint or do paste paper on one sheet of paper. They just do it all together because they just can't stop. And this is one of those where I don't know if you can see the marbling behind it, but then it's painted. And this is from San Francisco, Ingrid Butler, Moth Marblers it's called, her company. She worked with her husband. He died not long ago before this project. I'm going on a little long, sorry. So Faith Harrison, the marbler of the original Kleenex box that we all know and miss, that she famously got only paid $500 for that, even though they used it even until like recently, because I just found like a toilet paper wrapper that was made in Mexico that had the same pattern on it. So like that gold foil, anybody remember that one? She's the one. Very traditional marbler, did a lot of work for bookbinders and small presses. Some of these people, most of their clients were bookbinders, and other people were just making beautiful papers, and anybody could buy them for anything, you know. And so this is the end, and this was what wound up happening. So the beauty for me, I got a lot out of it, but the thing that I really got out of it that was the closest to my soul was that, all my life, and it's tied in with my interest in books, it's like I really believe in the power of the book, the power of the little book, a commercial book, the transformational nature of books. And I feel like I know what books can do for people. I've experienced it, but how often does it actually happen where somebody picks up a book And then, and the other end of that book, they're like not the same person anymore, right? Because that book changed them in some way. And then the result of that is usually you want to hug your book and carry it around with you everywhere, or you never want to let out of your sight, right? And that is the kind of book that I wanted to make. And so that was the challenge that I set for myself. And I didn't want to make a precious limited edition book. People ask me, millions of people ask me, are you going to make a special edition? They're going to make a special edition. I went, no, call the artist, buy the papers. I wanted to have like just a regular commercial book that anybody can buy. It's $65, so that's not like everybody can have it, but you know, it's a commercial book. And I wanted it to see if I could, through my decision making and choice of picking a designer, and if I could create a book that had those attributes. And that's what I thought, I'll never get this chance again because I never had the budget. Like I have 2 other books here that I published that I love these books, but artistically, I didn't have the budget basically for big illustrations and to hire a big designer and, you know, create the book that I want. This is the only chance I ever had to really do that. And it was just so wonderful to have that, for me to have that experience. And then when so Yale University Press distributes for the Met. Now the Met Pubs didn't publish this book. They wouldn't publish it. They said, well, you have to do it. So I'm the only one that had to do like everything myself. Like curators don't have to publish. They don't have to hire their designers and hire their editors and do the, you know, production, deal with the production and take their own pictures. So I had to do, I was responsible for like everything in this book. And that was terrifying, also good. You know, it was like a little bit of everything. But I did, you know, I can't blame anybody else for how it came out. So, I mean, I love the people in editorial. They were so kind to me. They helped me. They found my editor. They knew I needed a really patient, nice editor, like, because I'm not, it's just me telling them what to do. It's like there's not a whole staff there, like, for them to work with and know even the terminology that, you know, that they're using, because the terminology of publishing is so unique. And they helped me, you know, hire her. I hired my own designer because I really wanted someone that I felt got it, you know, got these papers and had something in common with them. And that was interesting how that happened. And then
who was the designer?
His name is Adam McIsaac. He lives in Oregon also. And how I looked at tons of books and I thought 2 things about the books, and maybe I'm wrong, but my impression was that a lot of the catalogs were a little bit lifeless. They didn't come alive. They weren't going to be transformational as books. You know, they carried the information, they presented it well. And then the designs that were like killer, that I thought were like, wow, these are really unique and interesting and innovative, they didn't really relate to the subject of the book that much. You know, they were like more about the designer showing off, or I don't know how else to say it, but you know, I thought, well, how does this integrate, or how does this relate to the story, the book, you know? So I wanted to find someone who could do both those things, you know? And so what I wound up doing was I went back to the book arts community and I put a query on the book arts list, and you know what that is. It's like just one of those diss lists of all the people who love to make books and ask each other questions. And I said, I want a designer to design my book on decorative paper that can make a book that's lyrical and immersive. That's all I said. And I got one answer from this woman in Oregon, and she said, well, try this guy. And I went to his website and went, perfect, that's it, he's great. So she found him for me, Roberta Labrador. She says, I think I know who can give you what you want. And she was absolutely right. We only had one fight in like all these years, and it was just a little bit of a misunderstanding because he wasn't expecting someone who was so intrusive in his process as me, you know, or that I would. But eventually,
Surprise!
Yeah, surprise. But we found a way to. I think we both wanted the same thing. You know, that's why he was so perfect. He wanted the same thing I wanted. You know, he wanted to make that book too. So, and I wasn't going to tell him how to make it. Once I found him, I just wanted to put my trust in him, except for little things like when it's like, who the hell can read that caption? You know, could you make it a little bigger? But stuff like that. But so that's how it ended up. And when I had to write a contract for Yale University Press because they said, you know, I couldn't use the Met contract because it's doing it on my own, and so editorial helped me do that. They sent us their contract, and then when it all got done, Yale said to me, "We think this is going to be an instant classic." And I went, "Oh my God, that is just perfect." So I was so excited about it. It did sell very fast. There's probably a few copies left, and that's, you know, that's how it should have been. That's exactly what I wanted, and I felt very like, oh, and these artists, like the artists came alive, you know. A lot of them hadn't done it for a long time, or they were just getting older and not feeling so great about themselves. They just came alive through this process, and a lot of them like went back to work. I have so many stories about things that happened, or things they told me that happened, you know, afterwards or as part of the process, and just the stories about how they all helped each other, like the ones that were kind of lost or ones that had passed away. Artists got together and made collections for their friends who were no longer with us, or who didn't have papers anymore, like had already given away their papers. Like we recreated, you know, collections through a group effort. You know, it's not like they just had everything and could send it. It didn't always work that way. So my favorite story, and I don't know if I ever said it to him, I tell everybody because it's such a great story, just as a story. But one of the artists whose work I loved and did a really unusual technique that nobody could figure out how he did it. I won't say his name, I guess. So everybody said, I said, how do we get, I only had one of his papers because somebody sent me one. I didn't get him from him. And there was an article about him in Ink and Gall. And I said, how are we going to get his papers? And a few people sent me the papers. And when it came time, I said, I got to put one in the book, even though we don't know a lot about him. And I said, if it's going to go in the book, I had to do permissions. That was the whole thing I didn't ever even thought about. I had to do permissions for the book. And I was like, how am I going to get permission from him? And I called Cove, who was, you know, because I thought he remembers everybody, you know, from the 1989 gathering. And I said, well, Cove, when this guy came to the gathering, did he have a family? Did you know his family? He says, yeah, I think he had a son. We're talking from 1989. So he finds his son. He calls him up and he tells him what I'm doing. He says, well, can Mindy use, you know, the picture of the paper she has? And his son said, yeah, she can use it, but why don't you ask him yourself? He's sitting right here. Everybody had told me he died. Like 4 of the artists told me he died. So I thought he was dead. Everybody thought he was dead, and how he died. Like I heard so many stories about him. And it's like, and then Cove said, I had to hang up. You know, because he was so embarrassed. And I said, all right, I'll call him. You said having a thick skin, right? So I had to call this guy who, like, you know, you could imagine. And because I had to get his permission. And I call him and he says, yeah, I heard everybody thinks I'm dead. I said, yeah, but isn't it great you're not? Because now you can tell us how you made that paper. And then he wrote like this incredibly beautiful essay of like his technique of how he made this paper, which everybody was very happy to hear about, and was very interesting. And then, because he didn't have any of his own papers, he went back and he made a whole new edition of paper using his old techniques. And then he sent those. So it was like, that kind of stuff happened. That's crazy stuff, right? That's not typical like buying art stuff. So it was really a great story and a great project. And still adding. The other day, Sue goes, and I don't know if you've ever heard of Judene Paper Mill, which is a paper mill that started in New York in the 70s. She was the founder. Yeah, I didn't include a lot of hand paper making also came and experienced revival at the same time. But that's a whole other group of people. So I didn't know if I'd ever have a chance to make that collection too. I mean, I told my boss I was going to collect 12 artists, and I had 50. So already I was pushing it, because it takes a lot of space. And so I tried to collect some decorated paper artists, hand paper making artists that made decorated paper, so at least I would have them represented. Like, this is a decorated paper made by Andrea Peterson, and it's red. She made a red sheet, wet, couched. And then she did a stencil for the black and the white. So this decorated paper was made all at the same time when all the pulp was wet. And then she pressed it together. So, and she offered this in her catalog. So this is like a regular old sheet that she sells in her repertoire that you can order, you know. So she did do a lot of decorated papers. But the artists who made like the white papers and the plain plain papers and the papers for conservators, like Twin Rocker. I don't know if you've ever heard of these mills. These were amazing, famous mills that are still around today. Tim Barrett, who got a MacArthur, who started a mill in University of, he wrote an important book on Japanese paper. So Sue goes and she printed beautiful books on handmade paper, and she brought us her books, and she brought us all the full sheets of the papers that she used for each book. So that was an incredible gift to have, because how many books can you go back and see the original full sheet before it was made into anything? So like it's still happening, and people are still wanting to give us stuff. And so besides paste paper, handmade paper, I think I've shown you. One other kind is a Japanese style, which is called suminagashi. It's made in the same way, Western, it's marbled on a bath of water, but usually with very few colors, sumi ink, like black, and maybe one or two other colors. And it's very loose, like they don't try to control it. They like that it is like water, that it's like waves. And this was made by Susan Christopherson, I think, who started her career as a textile artist, and so she makes a lot of her papers are very sort of textile related in ways I could explain, but it would take a while. This is also gilded. A lot of the artists added gold or metallics to their papers. So that's all I have for you right now, and I did bring up a few copies of my book. If you want to look at one, you can just look at it. I have a couple if you wanted to buy one, and I brought my other two books. My one on Blooks. This is all my collection in this book, or as it was before it expanded. And this was a book that the first book I wrote of these three on Alice Morse, who was one of the first American book cover designers in the 1880s. And so you're welcome to look or come and look and talk about stuff more, or go home and go to sleep. And do your... Oh yeah, ask questions. Any questions?
Go ahead.
Joanna?
So was there any kind of mechanized production of marble
Yes.
paper? I mean, I think of the huge
You mean
number
totally
of
machine
editions
made?
in 19th century England.
Okay, like the cockerel papers or the ones before then? Yeah, I mean, there were ways that, there were always printed papers, marble papers that were printed. And there was machinery that assisted in marbling, like especially in applying the paint and making a pattern all in one. But it was handwork. And it was a person in their marbling bath. Yeah. I mean, I have a book that's a storybook for children about how it was published by Harper's, and it's half of the book is how the storybooks are made. And it has wood engravings of the Harper factory in like 1870. And it has pictures of all the departments. And those marblers are sitting there marbling and hanging their sheets up. Yeah. The books are being printed. They're stereotyped then. There's printing their books stereotyped. The bindings by hand still then, and the marbling, yeah. Printing, I would say, is an area where it was mechanized, but not so much marbling and binding at that time. Took a while.
I have two questions. They're related. Do you give this talk to art students?
No.
And
Well, I would give it to anybody who asked me. But I don't go out there and try to find people to give it to.
Because I was wondering,
Would
are
I?
any youngish
Yeah.
artists interested in this technique anymore?
Oh, are there? Sure. Well, I mean, the Chain of River is traveling the world trying to teach it to every single person that lives. And a lot of people, yes, in schools, marbling isn't hard, it's just really hard to do well and in a repetitive way. So it's a perfect thing to teach children. All these techniques, yes, they learn them. I mean,
is there a market for this now?
It's very hard because the stores that sold them don't exist anymore, and online they're not. Yeah, I mean, not of this quality. I mean, my argument is that, there is a lot of really amazing paper being made now internationally, and they sell it online. But it's hard to see. You can't go there and see it and feel it and touch it and smell it. It's harder to do that. You have to have faith. Even seeing a picture of this is nothing compared. It's a painting, right? So you don't know.
You know, I mean, the days of those going to this, I mean, well, Tallis you could go to. Tallis is like, they copied New York, so New York Central, you would go there in their paper department. And it was like the whole department was a giant book. Like they had this whole wall of these pages that would turn, they were fanned out. And you could flip through all the papers. First you could do the decoratives, and then you could do the handmaids, and then you could do the machine maids, and you would see hundreds and hundreds of paper, and then you would know it when you saw it, the one that you wanted, right? You would go through until it'd be, yeah, that one. And then you'd say, how many sheets do you have? Cross your fingers that they had enough sheets. And you know, where can you do that now? Tallis is a bookbinding supply store. It's not open to the public all the time, but they still have that. But even the big store that was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, Hollanders, they're online, only online now. It's just, it's a different culture in terms of paper. Everyone's still doing it. A lot of people still do it. How would I buy, if I wanted to find a new artist that was like in their 30s that got really good at this, and I knew I could commission them, commission an edition for them like I could from these people, like who would that be? Because what most artists are doing now who get good, they're being artists and they're making art. They're not making production papers. These artists are a product of the 70s. They weren't really that interested in money. These sheets sold for like $15, $12. And artists today could make something like this and sell it for a couple $100 or something, right? So that's what they're doing there. So it's hard to like, I'm being extreme because I'm sure there's lots of in-betweens, but there is a Facebook page called the International Marblers, and also there's a lot of pages for decorated paper artists who don't just marble but do other things. So you can look online and sort of see, that's what I'd have to do. I did include some contemporary artists in my exhibition and at the end of my book, and most of them, some of them, if they were production artists, they had two lines. They had a bookbinding line, you know, and they had an art line. And there wasn't always that much difference between them. Sometimes it was just the size of the sheet. But one they sold for more, and they still want to service the bookbinder community, you know, because it's a tradition. It's something they always did. But the modern world, they're much more into make different things than we were. I don't know. Do I have to explain it? No. I'd be totally subjective anyway, but which I always get into trouble. So Dan and Regina, I did bring a couple of their actual sheets, which I can blow your mind. He makes this paper. And what makes these patterns are chemicals added to the paint. It's called a tiger eye, and this is a 19th century pattern. Isn't that stunning? And the metallic, can you see the gold or copper? He uses copper a lot. So he was a physicist. He was like a high school physics teacher. And this is one of her double marbles, and she used, so for the second layer, she used like photo flow. You know what photo flow is? Like it's a transparent dispersant used by photographers, and that's how she got the peekaboo holes. So the second layer is like thinner paint, and then she with the eyedropper, she dropped dots of photo flow to make the paint disperse into those dots, and so the bottom layer shows through. Am I explaining it well? Isn't it cool? She has a lot of control, you know, over her materials and her technique. That's the difference, is like the control these people have, the understanding of their environment, you know.
Well, I think we should
That's it.
thank Mindy. One more question.
Okay,
No,
yeah.
One more question. Did people actually buy a sheet like that and cut it up and
Yep.
glue it into books for
Yep.
end papers?
Yep.
Wow.
All my sheets in my collection were for that. I just stopped using them after, you know, I still use some of them, but the good ones like these I would never use anymore. But that's what they sell them for. They're not selling them for you to frame these and put them on the wall.
When would you actually use them? And
How could I use it?
when would, in what kind
On a box, on a book binding, or
you rebind old?
making new books. Plenty of people love to make new books and new blank books for sketchbooks, or bind a paperback into a hardback, or make a gift.
In the Met Library.
Oh no, not in the Met. I would use them. I do have them in the Met Library, and I've always used them for gifts because I always get, at one point or another, we get a request to make a beautiful book, And what is a beautiful book? It's always like spine and corners and marble paper, right? Or marble, it has to have marble paper. So that's what I, when everybody wants a beautiful book, I can put one together pretty quickly. But these papers are my own papers. I tried to buy, so when I had the show, we had a symposium that was unbelievable. It was a wonderful symposium. I learned so much. It's been videoed. It's on the Grolier Club's Vimeo, it's called, or something, Grolier Club. And it was my dream, and it actually worked. I didn't have anything to do with it, but I begged the Center for Book Arts. I said, all these people are going to be in town. You're never going to have all these artists here at the same time. You should have like a paper sale, like if they still have papers, and everybody could still come and buy these papers and meet these artists, and like how cool would that be? Because we didn't really have a hands-on element, like that kind of element of this project. And so the center put it together, and about 8 of these artists came and brought their papers. They had old papers in their drawers, and I tried to buy papers from the ones that I didn't have examples of at that time. And then some of them I just called them on the phone and said, will you just send me a paper, because I want to do things like this, and I want to have one of yours to show people. So that's how I got these. Any other questions?
What's the rough date range? Sorry, go ahead.
You've been having your hand up for a while.
What's the rough date range of production of
The ones that we
materials you
have,
cover?
I would say most of them. The earliest one I have is, I tried to get 60s.
Yeah,
It
but
was very
70s.
hard, but I do have a couple of 60s, and I have 70s mostly through 2000s. Yeah.
Thank you, Vinnie.
Thank you.
Really terrific.
Thank you.
And, I've been thinking about the name of the series is Makers of History. But this is really about the preservation of history and and teaching us about something that would not have been preserved, saved, and presented. So it's really classic. What
It's an instant
we're
classic.
trying to get at with these talks.
Bye.